Okay, let's start our session. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Adel, and I'll be the moderator of this webinar titled Carbonate Reservoir Engineering and Modeling, presented by our instructor, Engineer Ahmed Khalid. Engineer Ahmed is a reservoir engineer with working experience in heavy oil, light oil, and gas reservoirs under various development strategies like steam injection and water flooding, and with different lithologies like carbonate and sandstone reservoirs into operators, having experience in reservoir simulation, reservoir management, classical reservoir engineering methods, reserves booking, equation of state, and pressure transient analysis. Before we start our session, I'll make a small presentation about OPA services. Here is our recent wave of live courses. We have conducted five courses, six courses with one more course to go. You can scan this QR code to register. We have conducted more than 40 live courses, which is now converted into recording and available for sales in different disciplines like reservoir engineering, G&G, rig and rigless operations, production technology, and so on. You can also scan this QR code to register in the recorded courses through our website. Here is one of best and most recommended services, which is mentorship program. It's a one-to-one mentoring sessions by highly experienced mentors. It's like a tailored program for you. Your request can include explaining the know-how of software, guiding on personal data, professional guiding for PhD and master, helping undergrad students in their projects. We have already completed more than 45 mentorship program with more than 900 learning hours, and the mentees were from more than 8 different countries. You can scan this QR code to apply for a mentorship program. Here's a glance at our website. It's www.opacourses.com, where you can access every service we have talked about, like attending free webinars, enroll in live courses, recorded courses, apply for a mentorship program, and apply for internship. You can access everything through our website, so make sure you pay it a visit. And finally, how to be an OPA ambassador. There are two tracks to join our OPA ambassadors community. Take one or more courses or take a mentorship program. So you may be asking yourself now, what will I get from being an OPA ambassador? You will get discounts on all courses in the future and group discounts when you invite your colleagues with you. Thank you for listening, and now it's time for our session. Engineer Ahmed, the mic is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay, I'm going to share my presentation now.
Okay.
So can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk you through a little bit an interesting topic for me, which is carbonate reservoir engineering and modeling, in which we are going to have a little bit of geological introduction, which I think it's important for every reservoir engineer to know a little bit about geology of the carbonate and the differences between the carbonate and the clastics. Also, some reservoir characterizations tool for the carbonates, including logs, cores, image logs, NMR, and so on. Also, fractured carbonate production behavior and the challenges that we are facing during the production phase in terms of acidizing, in terms of injection, in terms of production of the oil itself. Also, some basics or some introduction about the reservoir modeling of the carbonates, the models, the assumptions, and so on. So I will start with the geological introduction. The first one with what the differences between the clastic rocks, which is sands, and the non-clastic rocks, which includes the carbonates. So the clastic sedimentary rocks, they are formed by the weathering process in which the rocks, the other types of rocks like igneous rocks or metamorphic rocks, break down into some small or clay sands particles by exposure to the wind. And it can be classified to different types like conglomerate, precious sandstone, shale, based on the size of the grains itself. However, the non-clastic rocks, they form or came mainly from chemical or biological reaction. And they are named based on the mineral present. For example, limestone is based on the carbonate. Also, we have rock salt, gypsum, chert, and so on. Our interested or the non-clastic ores are all over the world, especially in the Gulf, in the Iraq, Kuwait, and so on. We have some in Egypt, in here, also in Libya, we have a lot. So they are wide ranging, and managing carbonate reservoirs are different, quite different from managing sandstone reservoirs. So if we're going to talk about the carbonate, what is the definition of the carbonate? Like I mentioned, it's named as it has carbonate minerals. And the principal or the two main members of this group, dolomite and limestone. Dolomite and limestone, the difference between them is the mineral that they have. So the dolomite, it has CaSO3. However, the dolomite, we have an ion that is replaced by CO3 with magnesium. This process is called dolomitization. The dolomitization is the geological process that happens in the limestone, which is composed mainly of the CaCO3, like I mentioned, and to be transformed into the dolomite, replacement of one calcium ion with a magnesium ion. This alteration happens in sedimentary environment and affects the rock's texture, the porosity, and the chemical composition, of course. What is the effect of dolomitization? The effect of dolomitization is they lead to an increase of porosity, permeability, because it can create secondary porosity, making this make the reservoir or the dolomite reservoirs are very important for the oil and gas and water storage. Meaning that while transforming or performing the dolomitization process, it enhances the porosity and the permeability of the reservoir. Now I'm coming to a definition, basic definition, which is the porosity. The porosity is the total void space in the rock. In terms, I'm talking about the total porosity. The total porosity is the total void space in the rock, whether it contributes to the fluid flow or not. However, the effective porosity is the percentage of the interconnected void space, which is contributing to the flow of the reservoir. Here, we have kinds of porosity that can be specified only for the carbonate. We have kind of fabric porosity, which is related directly to the depositional texture to the rock and is formed during the deposition and the early diagenesis. For example, we have here the fabric porosity types. We can find that in carbonate we have both the interparticular and the intraparticular, which is the inter with ER is between the particles or between the grains itself. However, the intra, it's inside the grain itself. And this happens because the carbonates can have some dissolution into the grain itself. The non-fabric porosity, it forms after the deposition because of the genetic process. Diagenesis is any action or any interaction that happened to the rock after the deposition itself, like crystallization, like the overburden, like chemical reactions, causing some action that affect the texture. For example, the dissolution is considered Dissolution meaning that we create bug or fracture because of some reaction between the water ground, for example, and the rock itself. And aromatization, like I mentioned before, or the fracture related to the overburden from deposition of other layers above it. So we can have fracture porosity, we can have a bug porosity, which is the main two types that we can find in the carbonate or in the dolomite reservoirs. Also, we have some carbonate classifications regarding to the carbonate sedimentary rocks based on different things, based on the composition, texture, and depositional environment. The most usually classification systems are Dunham classification, Forks classification, and they are mainly based on the texture or the depositional system of the rock itself. And we have also Lucia classification, which depends on the related mainly to their boroberm relationships, and it used for reservoir modeling. Here we have an example of Dunham classification, and we can see we have 6 or 7 types. We have these 2 types they are called mud supported system, which is mudstone and wexstone. And they have kind of low porosity and low permeability. That's because they have a small grains or non-sorted grains between them. However, going to the grain supported system, which they are backstone, greenstone, boundstone, we have a better porosity, a better permeability into them. So these 3 types, in terms of if you have reservoir or the reservoir is one of these 3, they are very good for production. Crystalline, meaning that an alternation happened to the rock post the deposition, and the grains itself transferred to another form, like for example dolomatization. I finished the first section, so anybody have a question?
Okay, for questions, you can either write it in the chat or raise your hand and I will enable the mic for you.
Seems no questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, but I kind of sneeze because I have flu, so my voice also is not clear. I think we have question.
Okay, I will enable the mic for you, Engineer Asima.
Please ask your question.
Okay, we have a question from Engineer Asdin. So he's asking which porosity is excellent in these types?
All of these types may have a moderate porosity or a good porosity even, but the main issue is the permeability itself. And the permeability is getting enhanced by going from the mud supported grains into the mud supported rocks into the grain supported rocks. So generally, according to this classification, the backstone and the greenstone are the better in terms of permeability and in terms of reservoir quality.
Okay, you can unmute yourself now and ask your questions, please.
Okay, thank you, Adil. I have a question. Most of when you are doing logis analysis and and structure analysis from seismic, yeah, we found that the porosity is really good, 30 to 35%, But the problem with the carbonate reservoirs now, mostly we don't have the source rocks now in the structures. Is it make a sense, or is something is normal in with the carbonate reservoirs?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last part of your question. I hear
When we
you
do the
tell that you
analysis,
have a good prosty.
yeah, when we do the analysis, we're looking for the petroleum elements mostly in carbonate reservoirs. Now, we don't find the source rocks now. Is it something is normal, or is different case in our case?
I think this is related mainly to exploration geologists more than reservoir engineers, but I think it's related to the petroleum system itself, because here in Egypt we find oil in the carbonates. So maybe this is related that you don't have a petroleum system at this issue, at this field.
Okay.
So I am going to share again with the second board.
Yes, please.
For the reservoir characterizations tool, we have several tools. One of the important tools that we are having is the core. And the core analysis, we can take it at the whole core by the coring or by sidewall cores. And it's very important in terms of routine core analysis and scale analysis. Routine core analysis to get the porosity, the permeability, the saturation, the grain density, and the lithology. Also, scale properties are very important in terms of relative permeability to detect fluid movement, also capillary pressure, and the wettability. In addition to, in carbonate, we have a special tool which is identification of secondary porosity and secondary permeability, which is the fractures, the bugs, and so on. Also, it's important to have cores for well-log calibration, and because in the scale analysis, we perform electrical properties like M and N to optimize the log analysis. Here an example for the core analysis for carbonates. As you can see, for example, in here, this is a core with touching bugs. You can imagine these bugs, which have a storage of either flow, either oil or water underground. This is a huge permeability, super permeability that you can see. Here also another examples. This is open fracture that you can see in here. Also, this is fractures that filled with minerals. Some minerals can be dissolved by acid, or some of them they are salts on salts, so they cannot be dissolved. So it's a dead fracture that we cannot produce. Also, some of them has some probe which is not continuous filled, like this fracture. Also, we have buggy, and the bug definition is the double the crystal size, which is critical different, and we can see even bugs like this size, which reaches to few feet and few inches in some cases. Also, in order to identify the fractures from conventional logs, there are some evidence that we can see in different rocks. Like for example, in caliber log, we can see some increase of the diameter because of the well bore is not stable at the fracture zones. Also, the resistivity log, we can see that it's lower in some cases, like what I'm pointing, and it's lower because the resistivity is generally high in the tight matrix because of the tightness of the rock. However, when we find a fracture that is filled with another matter, we can see a significant drop in the resistivity. Also, similar to that, we have in the neutron and the density, Especially in the density, we have a decrease in the density, and this is indicates that we have a kind of porosity, which is the porosity of the fracture, like what I mentioned. Also, the sonic logs that we have a general increase in the reading. However, if we have a vertical fracture, which is parallel to the wellbore itself, it not be detected using the logs. Another very important tool that we are going to talk, which is the image logs. For me, I consider the image logs are one of the best tools to characterize carbonates. Because it gives us a 3D or a 360 degrees view of the wellbore itself. For example, in here, we have this open fracture, and you can see it's like sinusoidal shape. It can be interpreted by the surface company providing this log easily. You can follow the 300. Each one of these layers is a measurement of a bed, and you have generally 4 to 6 pads according to the tool. And when you connect it together, you can find this fracture around the wellbore itself, and it's can be characterized by this sinusoidal shape. Also, another example in here is this fracture, and around it there is anhydride nodules. And you can identify the fracture, like I said, with this sinusoidal shape. And the anhydride nodules are in this white shape. Another example, this is a VUG example. So we have here this dark colors, scattered dark colors indicates VUGs, but with a small size. The next picture is with a larger size, and this one is more larger. Going into this direction, we can see increasing in the VUG system, and you can see the scale is feet. So we can see VUGs that can have reached to in terms of height into feet. By the way, image logs can be acoustic or can be resistive. And this, the usage of either one of them depends on the well condition itself, depends on the oil mud, depends on the resolution that you want. But generally, the resistivity based method is the better in terms of the resolution. And but it has special conditions, like we should use it into water-based mud, not an oil-based mud. Also, this dark color indicates either heavy oil, if you can have heavy oil, or a resistive mud that you can have. Another important tool to characterize the carbonates is the NMR. So the NMR is the nuclear magnetic resonance. It's used to identify the fluids into the wellbore, and also the residual water, and the movable water, if there is movable water, and the connate water. So it depends on releasing hydrogen and measuring the response of the formation at 2 times. From the NMR, we can have a direct measure of the porosity without any lithology effect. We can have fluid identification. We can measure the oil and the gas and the water. Also, we can have a permeability estimation using some correlations. Also, we can have some of hydrocarbon typing, like the gas or light oil or heavy oil, and it can be used in the tight and shale gas formations. So I finished the second part. If you have any questions.
Okay, we have a question from Engineer David. He's saying, generally, a naturally fractured reservoir will produce from its zones hydraulically. If you could read it from the chat, it would be better. It's in the chat box.
Okay. I'm going to talk about this topic, about the assumptions of this, but it depends on the reservoir type. Generally, it depends on the reservoir type. Most likely, you will produce what is it, the fractures first, and then the matrix should feed the well and the fractures again. But if the feed will be as much as you withdraw the fractures, you will have a stable production. Otherwise, you will deplete the fractures and they will continue producing what is in the matrix, and it will be lower production. I think okay. The resistivity log behavior. I will come to this again. I think someone missed my question.
Yeah, Engineer George is asking about resistivity log behavior and
Yes.
other logs.
Yes, we can have identification of the fractures in some cases by this method that you can see. We have a drop in the resistivity associated with a drop in the density neutron, and also associated with a drop of the acoustic impedance, or the sonic log. And this is also another example that you can see in here and here. So once you have a sudden drop or a sharp drop in the resistivity associated with a drop with the density, and also increase in the value of of increase of the value of the sonic log, you are having most likely a fracture. Regarding the image log, like I mentioned, it can identify either the vags through the analysis, or either the fractures by the sinusoidal shape, which is made by the interpretation of the image log itself. And like I mentioned, there are two types: acoustic or resistivity. The main difference between them is the relation, is the well-bore type that we are using and the resolution. Because resistivity, I think it cannot work into the oil-based mode. However, the resistivity image log is better in terms of the resolution. I hope that I answered your question. Any other questions?
And just a reminder that you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, I'm going to the third part. This is the typical production behavior, like I was speaking about. You can see I have here, it's typical fracture behavior, but it could be different from a well to a well according to the parameters of the well itself, in terms of the fracture velocity, the fracture permeability, also the interaction between the matrix and the porosity, or the contrast between the permeability between the fracture and the matrix. If we have here, we have the red, the fracture flow, and this is typical if we have a higher permeability in the fracture compared to the matrix. So we deplete first the fracture, and then we can get some oil production from the matrix, and we have a stabilized production from the matrix, and we produce what we are producing from the matrix. And we can see the blue curve is the summation of the two curves together. So we have a flash production, and then we have a stabilized production. This flash production is related to the production from the fractures first, and then the contribution from the matrix. In some cases, we can see this decline is more sharp, is sharper than this, or less sharper than this. Depends on, like I said, the contrast between the permeability of the fractures, or the intensity of the fractures compared to the permeability of the matrix. Another issue that we are facing is the water injection, and any EUR method in the fractured carbonate. Let me imagine, or let me explain in this figure. This is fractures network in the well, in the reservoir, and we have an injector and a producer. If you inject it in here, and you have a huge connectivity, you will have a water breakthrough within few hours. I worked in the field, in a field that we can see the effect of the injection within 1 day because of the super connectivity. So it's very important to understand the fracture orientation and the fracture direction between the wells before you start any type of injection, because you can have a very quick breakthrough that will destroy the production of the producer, and you will not have a good production from the wells unless you understand very well the relation or the fracture orientation, and you make sure that your injection will not go into the direction of the open fractures to the producers. Another issue, and it's mainly related to the production technology engineers, which is acidizing the low permeability, low fracture zones. If we have a high permeability zone and we are performing an acid job, acid like electricity will go into the easiest direction. So it will go to the high burn, and the low burn zones will not be touched. And actually, I have a high burn zones, so I don't need to acidize these zones. I need to acidize the low permeability zones. So there are several solutions. If you can mechanically isolate these zones, you have a perforation and you can put a bucker also and perform acidization, it will be a solution. Otherwise, there are solutions like divergence or diverting agents that can be used in order to plug the high permeability zones, focus acid on the lower permeability zones, and then post flush. You can remove these diverters. Another challenge that I've seen also is acid nearby the water zones. Acidizing the fractured carbonates are very critical, because if you have fractures and it's kind of closed or closed by minerals or so, and you performed an acid job into these fractures and you connect it to the water source, it's done. You will produce 100% water. Once you are connected to the water, the mobility of the water is very high compared to the oil. It will block the oil production. And because of also, like I mentioned, the permeability contrast between the fracture and the matrix, you will produce the water and you will not be able to extract the oil from the matrix again. Even also in reservoirs. I remember a reservoir that I worked on that we produced, it was very vuggy. We produced a lot, and unfortunately, it was kind of active water drive. So we produced the oil from the bugs and fractures and increased the withdrawal. So the water breakthrough happened in most of the wells suddenly, quick, very quick, and we are not able to access the oil that is. We still know that is in the matrix, but we couldn't access it again because the fractures are full of the water masking this oil. We are not able to produce this oil. If you have any questions.
Okay, I think there is no any question.
No questions? Everything is clear? I hope so. Sorry.
Yeah, we all hope so.
Okay. So, regarding the reservoir modeling, there are different models that we can use for reservoir modeling into the carbonates. But we need to classify them first to see which type fits for which type. So we have a classification by Nelson. He classified the naturally fractured reservoir in terms of the behavior of the production into four main groups. First group, reservoirs where the fractures provide the essential porosity and the permeability. And here we are speaking about reservoir that the matrix is very, very tight. And we will produce from the fractures only. Another example, the second type, the reservoirs where fractures provide the essential permeability only. However, the porosity, the matrix have the porosity, meaning that the matrix will feed the fractures and the fractures will feed the wells. I am going to clarify this in the next slide. The third type, reservoirs where the fractures provide the permeability assistant to already a producible reservoir, meaning that this reservoir has a matrix, a good matrix porosity, a good matrix permeability, and we can produce from them. And there is an additional permeability that comes from the fracture that increase the productivity of the well. And the fourth type, which is a reservoir with we have fractures, but it has little or no volume of permeability. That could be filled with minerals or closed fractures. These closed fractures, in reality, can be opened by acid or we cannot be opened by acid. It depends on the filling of the fracture itself. In better words, we can classify these reservoirs into four main types. For type A, fractures provide the essential permeability and the matrix provide the essential porosity, meaning that the matrix is not able to produce, but only feed the fractures with a small amount of oil or the or liquid, whatever the type. The type B, fractures provide the essential permeability. However, the matrix and the fractures provide the porosity. It's almost the same, especially, but also, sorry. Fractured, like I mentioned, fractures provide the essential permeability. However, the matrix and the fracture provide the porosity. That meaning that we have oil stored into the porosity, into the fracture, the matrix at the beginning of time. However, the fractures only that feed the wells. Type C, fractures provide the essential porosity and the permeability, meaning that the matrix cannot provide either storage for the oil or connectivity to the wells, meaning that we will produce only from the fractures. I will not be able to produce from the matrix. The fourth type, meaning that the fractures and matrix provide the permeability and the matrix provide the essential porosity, meaning that we are able to produce from both the fracture and the matrix. In order not to confuse you, there are two main models that we use in this simulation. Regardless of the classification that we are having, we have either dual porosity model or dual porosity, dual permeability model. What are the main difference between them? In case of the dual porosity, the matrix only storage. It contains fluid, either hydrocarbon or water, but it cannot flow into the wellbore. However, in the dual porosity, dual permeability, the matrix and the fracture, both of them can store oil and can produce into the wellbores. The fracture rule here, in the dual porosity, it's the only pass. we can only produce from the fractures. However, in the dual porosity, dual mobility, we can produce from the matrix and the fractures. In terms of the flow mechanism, here the matrix flow into the fractures and from the fractures to the wellbore, and here we can produce from the matrix to the wellbore and from the matrix to the fractures to the wellbore. So we have the two of them are producing, or we can produce from the two of them. Also, this is a similar that we can have. In the dual porosity simulation, the matrix permeability considered very tight. It cannot be reduced. However, in the dual porosity, dual permeability can reduce. So it's important to identify the matrix permeability. The matrix flow is not allowed in here. We cannot produce through the matrix into the wells. However, in the dual porosity, dual permeability, we can produce it. The matrix flow, fracture flow, it's one way only, from the matrix to the fracture, then to the well. However, here we can produce from the matrix to the well, or from the matrix to the fracture to the well. It can be produced. The shift factor, by definition, is the relation or the factor that represents the interaction coefficient or the feed flow between the matrix and the fracture. It's required in the both cases, but dual porosity permeability is more important. Here in the fracture permeability, it's the only way to the flow. However, in the dual porosity, dual permeability, it's important, but also the matrix can flow. Regarding the flow passes, like I mentioned before, dual porosity model through the fractures only, and dual porosity, dual permeability through the fractures and the matrix. So in summary, the dual porosity is simpler and assume only the matrix, the fracture is the dominant flow. However, the dual porosity, dual permeability allows both fractures and matrix to contribute to the flow, making it more realistic, but still we will have a lot of complications related to the computing time. It will take very much time. And I will talk about this in the next slides. Let's take an example, how we select the best model or the best fit model for a field. For example, here we have fractures in the reservoir present the permeability, and the matrix provides the essential porosity, meaning that we have a good porosity in the matrix, but we have a low permeability in the matrix, and we have fractures. So most likely the fractures is the only way to provide the flow into the wellbore. So this is an approximation to the class A, like we mentioned. So our best model will be, in this case, the dual porosity model. So if you have a case that you have a matrix system with a good porosity, but with a low permeability, and we have fractures that provide the main fluid path, it's better to use dual porosity model instead of dual porosity dual permeability model, because most likely with low permeability matrix, you will not be able to produce. I think we should have some questions because I think this issue should be raised. Any questions?
I think we have a question here from engineer George. He's asking, can we determine the type by relating it to the production behavior? Can we determine the type by relating it to the production behavior or not?
Yes, we can, because most likely the fracture or the dominant fracture flow, you will see a huge production at the beginning, and then you have a very low production at the tail, meaning that you produced from the fractures and the feed from the matrix to the fractures is very low. However, if you have core for this well, and you will for this reservoir, you will be very sure by measuring the permeability of the matrix itself. So the more data you will have, the more data you will show. But from reduction behavior, yes, you will kind of know where is your reservoir in terms of productivity, and based on this, you can select your model. Any other questions? How do we identify the type of our natural flow reservoir? From the characterization tool that I've mentioned. If the more data you have, the more you will better characterize your reservoir. If you have image logs, you will see if you have vugs, what is the intensity of these vugs, what are the fractures, what are the intensity of these fractures, is fractures is connected or not. In addition to the production behavior, if you have connectivity between wells, what's the connectivity between wells? In addition to that, what is the production behavior? Is tending to decline or not? If it's tending to decline, why this is decline is coming from? It's coming from depletion. It's coming from that you produce the fractures and you are compensating only from a tight matrix. So the more data you have, the better characterization that you will get. And that's why I mentioned the reservoir characterization tools. Any other questions?
I think there is no any other question.
Okay. So I'm going to continue. So the data sources for the dual porosity simulation models of dual porosity dual permeability include routine and spatial core analysis, of course, logs, including imaging logs, well testing if available, RFT and MDT for if available, also the geological studies related to the horizons and seismic to obtain the structure of the reservoir. In addition to that, we need from the logs to identify the metric porosity, the fracture porosity, matrix permeability, the fracture permeability. And I'm going to talk about the fracture porosity and the fracture permeability, how we can obtain them. Also, the matrix fracture shape factor that I've talked about, and we can get it from the cores, from the logs. Also, it's a matching parameter from the history matching. In addition to that, we have a rock flow properties, and we have the application for everything. We have a matrix relative permeability in terms of water, oil, and oil gas, matrix capillary pressure in terms of water, oil, and oil and gas also, and the fracture relative permeability, fracture capillary pressure. And we here that found an example of the fracture relative permeability is like an X shape because the fracture is super conductive. It's almost permeable, so we have this shape. We have this shape representing the relative permeability in the fracture phase. Also, we have driving mechanisms in the dual porosity dual permeability reservoirs. They are the similar like any drive mechanism except for some exceptions that I want to speak about it. So, for example, we have an oil expansion that forces with the pressure drop, oil expands in the wellbore, forces the oil to come out from the matrix, go into the fractures, or come from matrix to the matrix until reaching the wellbore. Also, in addition to that, we have the capillary pressure imbibition, in which the wetting phase, the wetting phase pushes the non-wetting phase out of the grains, leading to the wellbore. And also, due to the difference in density, we have important for gas oil systems regarding the difference in density between the oil, especially in the gas, oil, and water. So the gas is embedded out from the matrix going into the fractures. So here we are going to discuss the fracture modeling approaches. And actually what happens, or generally what happens, is that we have the available data in terms of logs and image logs. Logs like the normal simulation that we have, it's going to be upscaled, and then the properties are distributed based on stochastics or methods. In terms of fractures, we have fracture intensity, fracture aperture, and fracture properties that can be calculated from the image logs. After that, it got be upscaled, but when it got be upscaled, we have other outputs. We have outputs related to the permeability of the fracture in the three directions, and also the porosity of the fracture, in addition to the shape factor. After that, you will not have any relation with the image log or the roses of the fracture that you have. You have only values of the cells. You just duplicated or created cells for fractures that have fracture properties, which is, like I mentioned, fracture porosity, fracture permeability in the three directions, and the shape factor, which represent the relationship between the fracture and the matrix in terms of fluid movement. After that, it's populated all over the reservoir. And this called discrete fracture network. So once you generated the discrete fracture network and calculated the shape factor properties, you have to history match based on the production and the pressure data. For example, if you know that if you, from the actual production, that the one well is affecting by injection into the other well, you have to study the fracture into the two wells, if available, and see which zone, which contributing zone that are causing this connectivity. And you have to adjust the parameters of the DFN based on the production. Of course, the more data that you are going to have is the better for the modeling, but in many cases, we don't have enough data to judge. The enough data that we can have is some data related to the course, or some data related to a pressure is depleted in certain zone if there are several zones that are separated. So we can know that this area is connected somehow to this well, and then we can increase the parameters to match this. So finally, to get to a conclusion, it's a kind of a history matching parameters more than parameter that you can, because of course we don't have all the data, for example, for all the wells, but we need to adjust the parameters to get a better match or a best match from our perspective to match the real data that we are going to see. Of course, we can reach to this match with several solutions, but actually with different realizations, and this could be an uncertainty in the carbonate modeling. But like I mentioned before, the more data you have, the less uncertainties that you are going to have, and the better or a better match that you are going to achieve. And after this, you will have a better forecast for your model. Thank you. This was my slides. Okay.
Thank you, Engineer Ahmed, for this fruitful webinar. We will take a 2 minutes break until the attendees fill this feedback form that I will send in the chat box right now. And then we will back to receive your questions. We already have 2 questions.
Okay.
So please fill the feedback form, and we will come back in 2 minutes. So let's receive the attendees' questions. The first question is, do you mind going back to slide number 25?
Yes. Yes. Sorry,
Number
but
25. Yeah. What did you want from here, NM? Okay, until he answers, we will take another question from Engineer Muhammad Mohsen. What is the effect of type of NF on pressure derivative?
yes. Generally, the effect of the dual process, dual permeability, you can see in the infinite acting period, you can see a drop. And it's characterized by two main things. I will try to find a slide to show you, it will be easier. You can see the slide.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, this is the effect of the natural fracture on the pressure transient analysis. You can see this is drop. This is related because you, at the first time, you will have the contribution of the fracture system itself, and then you can see the matrix contributes into the fracture, and then you come back again to the total contribution. It depends, this value depends on two values, lambda and omega. They are dependent on the permeability contrast between the fractures and the matrix. It's a wide topic that we can talk about it later, but this is generally the idea. I hope, yeah, that I could answer your question. This is the effect generally. You can see this drop in the derivative of the pressure, and it's related to the permeability contrast between the matrix and the fractures.
Yes, for slides and the recordings, they will be shared on the webinar's WhatsApp group. I just sent the link on the chat, so make sure you join it.
I have
So, any more questions?
another question from slide 28. Yes. Slide 28, the V is the bulk volume of the grid itself. It depends on your grid, depends on your grid size, which is happened by the log upscaling, and your vertical distribution of the layers. So it's calculated from V to represent the grid size in the simulator itself.
Okay, thank you. So, Engineer Muhammad is following up his question. So he's asking, can we use V derivative to determine type of our NF?
No, it will give you kind of the identification of your the difference between the permeability of the fracture to the permeability of the matrix. And it will help you, yes, to identify if the difference is huge, so you can ignore the productivity of the matrix compared to the fractures or not. Yeah, kind of, yeah, it will get you an information. Generally, we don't use the dual porosity model, to be honest, unless we have a very, very tight matrix. that we are very sure that it will not be a main contributor, so we can ignore it to reduce the time of calculations.
Thank you.
Another question: what is the material used in the
Engineer
injection?
Ahmed is asking, what is material used in injection?
Whatever the material used
Yeah.
in the injection, we can use. You can inject water, water flooding, polymer flooding, steam injection, whatever the material. It's according to the type of the reservoir or the type of availability of reservoir. In addition to the drive mechanism, in addition to the type of the fluid itself. If it's heavy oil, you will use steam injection. If it's light oil, you can use water injection. If it's the drive mechanism is gas cap, it's better to use gas injection. So it depends on the factors, depends on your reservoir itself. Any injection within the carbonate reservoir and fractured connectivity reservoir should be treated very carefully, because if you have injected in the direction of open fracture, you will have a direct breakthrough that will affect your productivity.
Okay. Thank you, Engineer Ahmed. I think this is all for today. Thank you again for this fruitful session. I really enjoyed it. And thanks to attendees for attending, and see you soon, inshallah, in our next webinars. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just a reminder that we will share the recording of today's webinar and the material through our WhatsApp group. I just sent the link on the chat box, so make sure you join it. See you soon, inshallah.